Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar of IMPACTIVE, which is a project funded by Horizon Europe and the European Commission to look into how mechanochemistry, a technique that mixes and mashes molecules and compounds together without using solvents, could make greener chemicals, particularly pharmaceuticals. So the project IMPACTIVE has over 17 partners in 10 countries, including interested pharma companies like Novartis and Merck. And well, it's a pleasure to introduce here today the very good coordinator of the project, IMPACTIVE, Evelina Colacino, who will give us an overview of IMPACTIVE's story, IMPACTIVE's goals, and the latest achievements of the project. So Evelina is now a professor of organic chemistry and green chemistry at the University of Montpellier in France, and she works there to develop eco-friendly, sustainable technologies to prepare biomolecules, organic molecules, and pharmaceuticals using mechanochemistry. And particularly, she uses this technique to work into developing active ingredients or AIs in a better, more sustainable way. Evelina is a member of the ACS, the French Chemical Society, and she also leads work groups in mechanochemistry in IUPAC and EUCHEMS, which is the European Chemical Society, to things like homogenize nomenclature and develop the technology and make sure that technology transfer takes place in Europe and beyond. Until a while ago, she used to lead a cost action on mechanochemistry, which is a network also funded with European funds. And actually, this very cost action was the seed that eventually gave birth to IMPACTIVE. We actually met through that cost action because I think I was invited to one of the events they organized to do a webinar as well in science communication. And because of that, we were lucky enough to join the project IMPACTIVE, which was funded a couple of years ago. And again, without further ado, I'm just very happy to introduce the first webinar of IMPACTIVE. I'm very happy to introduce Evelina. And without any further to do, like, Evelina, the floor is really looking forward to your presentation.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Fernando, for your very nice introduction. It's a real pleasure to work with you and Agatha team across this IMPACTIVE project. In the next 20-25 minutes, I will try to give an overview of what is the advancement of mechanochemistry across Europe with several initiatives, including IMPACTIVE, but focusing on why IMPACTIVE and the projects before IMPACTIVE, why we were thinking to this project, because we were trying to answer some challenges. There are many challenges, of course, but we were focusing on some of them that, in our opinion, seem to be key and central for reducing the eco footprint of pharmaceutical companies. So usually when we talk about pharmaceutical production, of course, we talk about drugs, but we should also think about the carbon footprint that the pharmaceutical manufacturing and not only the entire supply chain is provoking to the environment. It is very difficult to compare the data regarding CO2 emission across different industries. However, some studies were recently published, let's say 2019, comparing the eco footprint of pharmaceutical companies, 15 top pharmaceutical companies versus the automotive industry. And as you can see from these histograms, pharmaceutical manufacturing companies in general polluting more, according to this data, more than the automotive industry. Therefore, there is a real need to reduce this impact. And one of the ways is, of course, to reduce the waste generated during the manufacturing because of the use and the disposal of medicine. Of course, there are plenty of efforts done already by pharmaceutical companies in this direction. However, we can even do better to avoid to contaminate the soil and the water. And one of the main problems related to this waste and to the production of waste is the amount of solvents that are used in the processes. Therefore, we need to reduce waste. We need to see what the source of this waste is mainly. So usually it's 80% of the waste comes from the manufacturing process. And we have also tried to make Europe resilient and bring back the European, the production of medicine and drugs to Europe. There was over the time a relocalization of production due to very strict rules that made Europe, pharmaceutical companies, preferring to produce outside our geographical borders. So the challenge is to reduce waste and to bring back to Europe the pharmaceutical production, the pharmaceutical manufacturing. So we were thinking that one possible solution is using technologies such as mechanochemistry, which is also a research field by itself. And along this line, just to give an overview about the application of this technology in other market sectors other than pharmaceutical industry, we can see that starting from powders, metallurgy market sectors, was absolutely the first implementing mechanochemistry at industrial level. This technology is used in other market segments with different level of technology readiness level up to even industrial realities. What is quite not yet implemented, it's in the area of organic synthesis. And in the case of IMPACTIVE, what we're trying to do is to make organic synthesis for preparing active pharmaceutical ingredients, and therefore pushing and fostering the implementation of this technology also in market sectors where this is not yet applied. Therefore, few words about what is mechanochemistry. There are several definitions published in the literature that would be very difficult to sum them up in an exhaustive way just within this webinar. However, you have to think that what we make is making molecule reacting upon mechanical forces such as shear and friction, and molecules react by effects due to impact or compression which are generated within our reactor. But mostly what we do is making the molecule reacting, forming covalent bonds, for example, without any solvent. And this is already a very, very good, let's say, achievement in terms of already reducing the amount of waste generated in the process, knowing that 80% of the waste comes usually in solvent-based process by the use of solvents and in downstream processes. But mechanochemistry presents several advantages with potential reduction of energy consumption and, of course, reduction of CO2 emissions of the process. This has to be, of course, investigated more, but there are not only these two advantages. I would say that mechanochemistry enables also what we call impossible reaction, in the sense that unlock new transformation that are inaccessible via solvent-based chemistry, just because this could be due to high energy barriers that in solution cannot be overcome, or solubility issues. However, these are not only the two main points. There are several other advantages, and dedicated literature has been written to illustrate by facts where mechanochemistry brings several advantages compared to solution-based chemistry. Another aspect that should be considered is that molecules in our processes, we don't need the experimental setup remain without need of our molecule reacts without need of high temperature or pressures applied. But this is, of course, if we look at macroscopic level. If we look at microscopic level, things are very much different, but this is something to be discussed not today. It's a technology that allows to save time. What does it mean? That usually kinetics are much faster compared to solution-based chemistry. We are working in highly concentrated media, I would say solid concentrated media. Kinetic is faster. What does it mean? It means also higher productivity over the unit of time, which can have, of course, advantages in terms of also of cost, producing more in less time and avoiding heating reaction under pressures. So which make the experimental setup usually a bit simpler compared to conventional solution-based chemistry. So Fernando already mentioned in the introduction a bit of background about the IMPACTIVE project. I would like just to give few numbers related to a study that was published in 2020, reporting on the use of technologies such as twin screw extrusion for preparing APIs, and in particular we prepared two molecules, nitrofurantoin and dantrolene, through this continuous manufacturing process. And nitrofurantoin, just for information, is a molecule that is listed by the World Health Organization as an essential medicine. It's a generic. And thanks to this study and through a close collaboration with chemical engineers specialized in life cycle assessment, they could demonstrate, calculate that for the manufacturing of this molecule by twin screw extrusion, it was possible to reduce of 80% CO2 emission and use of 12% the costs compared to the same process done through batch chemistry in solution. So this was a very encouraging result that led to think about the establishment of a cost action that at the end of its lifetime in 2023 was counting already 150 scientists, as you can see from the map, distributed mainly in Europe, but also beyond the European borders, that was somehow the starting point of a series of other initiatives. Indeed, there is not just cost action, there is not just our project IMPACTIVE, but I think it's important to list here some of the international initiatives that have been burgeoning since several years across Europe and beyond. And I think it deserves attention. The International Mechanochemistry Association that was founded already in 1988 in what is currently Slovakia, and was funded by pioneers in the area of mechanochemistry, working on the deep understanding of mechanochemical processes for hard materials and alloying. Fernando has mentioned already IUPAC task group on terminology and symbolism for mechanochemistry. This is a very important activities that wish to make consensus about the terms that are used in the area, but at the same time propose standardization that will foster the implementation at some point of mechanochemistry at the next level, so for its industrialization. And of course, mechanochemistry can be promoted also through professional networks. For example, European Chemical Society Working Party on Mechanochemistry recently established with the aim of giving visibility to the field, also giving implementation in academia, in teaching activities, or in fostering the implementation of in R&D processes, and why not at some point also promoting its implementation at industrial level. I would also like to mention, EUCHEMES counts, the Working Party counts today already 22 national chemical societies across Europe. And last on the list, but not least, is the Round Robin Project. This is a project that counts today 32 participants within 15 research institutions, and the aim of this project is to demonstrate that mechanochemistry is reproducible when we reach the steady state of the reaction, and this is reproducible independently on the mechanochemical device you are using or the experimentalist who is running the experiment. However, if you want to know more about these activities, you can refer to the web pages of each of the group mentioned here, and there is also a sum up published recently in Open Research Europe that you can refer to have all the information merged in a single document. But let's go back to what is IMPACTIVE project. At the early beginning of our project, Agatha team, who is involved in IMPACTIVE for communication and dissemination purposes, created a very nice animation explaining in only 3 minutes what the purpose of the project is. So please do not hesitate to have a look. This animation is very nicely done, and the QR code brings you directly to the video that is also available on the IMPACTIVE webpage. What's the general idea about IMPACTIVE? Knowing what are the problems, we need to reduce waste, we need to reduce the carbon footprint of pharmaceutical industry. We try to propose a solution to this. We want to have eco-design of APIs synthesis. So our starting point and the, let's say, idea that brought us to write this proposal is that we are aware, we could see from literature and from our own research that mechanochemistry is able to answer to several of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and consequently also to the European Green Deal objectives. So mechanochemistry is able to implement these objectives through research. So we said, why not trying to answer some of the problems of today related to pollution, related to CO2 emission, proposing a different approach to solvent-based manufacturing using mechanochemistry as a technology, not making use of solvents. So this was our starting point. And then the proposal was approved, and here you can see the partners who are part of our consortium. We are distributed in 11 countries, and our partners present complementary expertise, which are covering research, development, knowledge in manufacturing, and of course, exploitation and communication. So we are trying to cover the different aspects related to from lab scale to larger scale for APIs synthesis. But what is our goal? Our goal is to make mechanochemistry a commercial reality. But to do so, we need also fundamental understanding. Therefore, what we do is to investigate the synthesis of green pharmaceutical using batch and continuous mechanochemical processes at different scale, but mostly we look at the mechanism of the mechanochemical processes. And this cannot be done without experts, for example, in kinetics of mechanochemical processes, with dedicated working packages on these aspects. But how can we say that mechanochemistry is better also in terms of eco footprint? Of course, what we need is to assess the processes versus what is the common known manufacturing process. That's why some of our partners dedicate their study to the LCA assessment of what we produce mechaноchemically. Therefore, here you have briefly a sum up of our approach and the technology we use. So it's both batch and continuous. So of course, there are ball mills, there is extrusion, but there are technologies such as resonant acoustic mixing, bead mills, spray drying for specific purposes within the project. But of course, what we do, and it's written much more, we do a real technology assessment for each of the steps and for each of the API that we are investigating. Because we try to find for each transformation the best match in terms of technology and chemistry involved. So whatever will be the device or the technology we use, our purpose is to see what match the best, independently on the fact it could be a batch process or a continuous one, but we are not excluding any possibility in our investigation of what could fit the best for the specific step into study. And we are focusing on the preparation of a series of AIs in belonging to three different therapeutic areas, so anti-diabetic, anti-cancer, and anti-hypertensive drug. And after the initial screening on the multi-step mechanochemical synthesis of those APIs, we have selected already the most promising system for scale-up purposes. Our work is organized in 7 work packages. Work package 1 and 7 are respectively dedicated to management coordination and, of course, communication, dissemination, and exploitation of the most promising systems. But as you can see, we have other 5 work packages who are scientific ones that covers not only synthesis, but also multi-component preparation, multi-component system preparation, formulation, kinetics and reaction mechanism, scale-up engineering, and of course, LCA, safety and risk assessment. Presently, among the numbers of API that we have in our portfolio of molecules studied within IMPACTIVE, we have already prepared 6 API, replacing all the solvency step by mechanochemical methods. And presently, 5 patent demand has been deposited, and we hope they will be released by the end of the year. However, in the meantime, we wanted also to validate some of our approaches. So we focused also on preparation of molecules that are generic and that are also listed by the World Health Organization as essential medicine. And so, for example, we have prepared paracetamol by bead mill technology, phenytoin, which is an anti-epileptic drug by resonant acoustic mixing. And we have made also kilogram scale of ibuprofen co-crystals with nicotinamide. You can easily find these publications in the literature, even if the DOA are not given here in the slides. Therefore, we have the ambition, but we really believe that this can happen, to transform the pharmaceutical industry, providing a new way of manufacturing API. And therefore, we want to innovate, bringing new industrial applications based on soft mechanochemistry as technology, of course, but also with all the knowledge related to this research field. And we are ready for the next step. The next step is the scaling up at manufacturing level. Of course, we cannot do this without the key stakeholders, and we are open for discussion with interested group of scientists, industries, and policymakers. With this, I wish to thank you for your attention and time in attending the webinar, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so very much, Evelina, for a wonderful presentation and this overview of IMPACTIVE. Just before we start, I wanted to acknowledge again the fantastic funding by the European Commission and Horizon Europe, which made this project possible. You saw in one of the slides, we've got like over 7.5 million to work over 4 years, and that's a very impressive investment. And we're very happy to work in this project. I forgot to mention at the beginning for the questions. Obviously, this is not interactive, but we do have the Q&A on YouTube. So if you type your questions there, we'll try to address them during this Q&A session. And again, thanks, Evelina, for the presentation, and thank you so much for mentioning the work with Agatha. If you didn't scan the QR code, you could stay YouTube channel and go to different sections, and you could see the videos we've prepared, not only the animation, but then the corporate video we made about IMPACTIVE too. So now I'd like to go into the questions. We've got one from the audience, but I feel like it's very, very specific on sustainability. So before that, I wanted to address a couple of more generic questions to sort of, talk a little bit more about mechanochemistry. So first off, we were preparing an infographic for an upcoming trade show recently, and we keep using the statistics that 1 kilogram of pharmaceuticals, to generate 1 kilogram of pharmaceuticals, you also generate almost 200 kilograms of waste. So we're wondering, and probably the audience is wondering, where does that waste come from? And then also what happens in terms of energy. We've heard a lot about the sustainability aspects of mechanochemistry and reducing emissions. What type of energy is the pharmaceutical industry using? Where is all this CO2 emissions and where is all this waste coming from, that we very rarely think of when we take our pills?
As organic chemist, I see the waste already generated when we do solvent-based synthesis. So it's the solvent you use for your process, for your synthesis, and the solvent you use for recovering your product at the end, which means also purifying your product. And so this is one of the aspects, but you have also the energetic consideration to be taken. For example, if you have a reaction that is done upon heating or upon cooling, of course, you are spending energy to heat up or to cool down. And it's even worse when you make your synthesis in cryogenic conditions. So there is, of course, an advantage in using technologies that allows you to operate at room temperature and atmospheric pressure. But the waste comes also from the entire process of manufacturing, because, okay, you have your molecule, you have done your API, but then you have to formulate it. And here you still have other waste that are generated during the formulation process and so on. So it's all the chain that is involved in this waste generation. So what IMPACTIVE is trying to do is to minimize the use of solvent, not only for making the synthesis, but also for recovering the product and also for formulating the products. And we apply this approach also at different scale. We are not talking about just lab scale. We have a work package that is dedicated to scale up, that is also working on improving the downstream processes at larger scale to minimize all around the consumption of solvents.
Yeah, we're getting some feedback on the question channel about solvents sometimes being sold for heat generation, which I guess probably raises a bunch of other questions about the sustainability of just having solvents for burning, and the pollution related to that. But before we go into the questions, like I said, I wanted to have another generic overview. It was great to learn about the energy consumption and the solvent problem, but in terms of TRL, which is sort of magic, acronym that the European Commission always loves to talk about, what's the status of mechanochemistry, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry? Because we know mechanochemistry has been used for years and years in the industry, but maybe not that much in the pharmaceutical industry. We've got two pharma partners, Novartis and Merck, in the consortium. So is anybody in in the real pharmaceutical industry nowadays using mechanochemistry? And if so, what steps are they using mechanochemistry in?
This question done to an academic is quite tricky, because we are all aware that it's very difficult to know what is done inside a company before that the patents are released, if they are released. However, there are already realities of industrial synthesis. For example, for the synthesis of co-crystal, mechanochemistry is already an industrial reality, and there are very big players in the area that have implemented this industrially. So it's more a question, and this was already argumented in an article in 2021, an opinion article published in Tranvik Chemistry. Sometimes there is the idea that new plants need to be built for implanting mechanochemistry at industrial level. This might be somehow true, but however, there are already plenty of industrial devices used for other applications other than synthetic purposes that can be retooled or retrofitted to make, for example, organic synthesis. Then, of course, it's a question of process engineering, it's a question of safety. So this kind of, it's a multifaceted problem, and it's even not a problem. It's just, it needs merging the expertise of different scientists in all the chain of the manufacturing process. But I would say I'm absolutely not pessimist. It's just a question of embracing this technology as a technology that may fit some needs, as it happened with other technologies solvent-based. The problem here is the mentality switch that might be scary for some of the people, because if you pass from solvent-based chemistry to microwave or to continuous flow processes, you are always in solution. Here it's a question of reasoning in a different way, which is with no solvents. But in terms of implementation, tools are there. It's just we need to use them.
We have a very interesting question from someone in the audience, Marcel, who is asking about maybe a downside of mechanochemistry, if any. In particular, what happens with the contamination of some constituents and some products with mechanochemistry, and what happens when you take this into industrialization and bigger scales. If you do that in batch, or if you do that in continuous mode, can we talk a little bit about some potential downsides of mechanochemistry, if any,
Yes.
and how this compares to contamination in, let's say, traditional chemistry with solvents, which probably just evaporate, but in this case we might have like solid contamination and things like that?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. Indeed, we also address within IMPACTIVE these aspects. So every time we studied impurities which are generated within our processes. These impurities can be organic or metal-based, depending on the type of milling devices we are using and the processing condition you are applying. However, from the data that we have, but also from the data that are already published in the literature, as you can see from what is already known, the contamination levels remain very, very low, and in most of the cases, much lower than the threshold limits imposed by the pharmacopoeia, even for class 2 elements like cobalt, which are considered very, very harmful, especially for APIs. In APIs. So I would not consider this an issue because, okay, we think about mechanochemistry, we immediately think about contamination of metals, but there are, and we all know that even in solution, when you have manufacturing processes using solvents, you have contaminants like nitrosamine that are generated in some conditions, which are still impurities. So while we should think as something dangerous, just the metal contamination that we have, at least for the process we have investigated, remain much, much lower than the threshold limits imposed by the law, while there are, even in solution, other problems of impurities. So I think it's a question of, as I said, thinking to this technology as an opportunity, an additional opportunity that adds to what is already existing. Science progress, so industry will progress with, and policy hopefully will follow.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, Evelina. It's also, I think it was an interesting question from the point of view that, you know, if we eventually make pharmaceuticals with mechanochemistry, we probably need to reevaluate things like safety assessments and things like that, because we're used to looking into, like you said, nitrosamines and organic pollutants, like, you know, chlorinated compounds. But in this case, we may need to rethink our analysis to account for possible metal contamination or other things. We've got more questions, and I don't want to leave them behind. We've got David congratulating you on the presentation and asking a couple of things, both very closely related on scalability of mechanochemistry. The first question is, how do you ensure that your products are homogeneous when you do mechanochemistry? And then he's also asking about the technology roadmap for mechanochemistry, which I'm sure we can address from IMPACTIVE, given that it's one of the goals of the project. Like, how do we reach the market? How do we grow on TRL? And how we make sure that the processes we're describing and patenting and publishing eventually get adopted by the pharmaceutical industry. So homogeneous products, scale up. That was the two questions.
Homogeneous products, we have not observed in our reactions something that is not homogeneous. If it's not homogeneous, it's because the reaction is not proceeding to full conversion. There is also a question related to the rheology of each specific step. So playing on the process conditions, we manage this, because if you have a system that is not able to mix up properly, of course there is homogeneity, but at this point, inhomogeneity, and at this point your reaction doesn't work properly. So the challenge is not just a chemical challenge, like finding the right stoichiometry or the right catalyst to make what we want to do. It's a question of finding the optimum technical parameters and process parameters that makes our process successful, and ideally selective and with no byproducts, and which makes the downstream processes easier because we get rid of simple byproducts that might be in organic salts instead of being obliged to purify. So about inhomogeneity, I don't think it's an issue if you implement it properly. Regarding the second point, which is the roadmap is dictated by also somehow the implementation at the industrial level. And for this, we cannot do it without companies. We cannot do it without policymakers. Therefore, for me, the roadmap is just, the industrial implementation is just a question of time. Things require time to be well done, to be reliable. The knowledge is there, the proof of concept is there. It's just a question going to the next level. That's why IMPACTIVE will end in less than 2 years. It will be our data, will be a starting point for those wishing to go over the TRL that we hope to reach by the end of the project. We hope to reach 5, 6 by the end of the project. So then it's not in our hand anymore, but we are ready to exchange knowledge and to provide the knowledge to work with the key manufacturing companies, key stakeholders for the next processes.
I think that's one of the good things of a project like Impactive is the fact that because it's still low TRL and it's like what Europe calls a RIA, so a research innovation action. We work with like several actors at a very early stage, and then hopefully this will become something more innovative, something more industry based, or even potentially like a startup or something that gets to exploit the results in a bigger scale. I'm really fascinated by the, not only the questions, but the feedback we're getting from the audience, because Marcel has come back again on the impurities, commenting on how it's not only the worries about potential impurities and potential contamination, but also how sometimes like tiny particles, not only metal particles, could influence crystallization, which, as we all know, is very important in the preparation of pharmaceuticals, which need co-crystals, which need other ingredients apart from the APIs to make sure that they reach the public. But I feel like if we get into such detail, we're going a little bit beyond the scope of the webinar, which is intended to like general audiences. But I mean, if you want to respond, Evelina, of course, please go ahead. But I'd like to, Marcel, if you want to contact us, we've got a form on our webpage, and we'd love to stay in touch and maybe engage in a proper scientific discussion after the end of this. But yeah, Evelina, what do you think about this?
I agree. Thank you, Fernando. I think this deserves more deep exchange. However, we also look when we do our molecules and the crystallinity of the molecules. And this is also particularly important, which kind of polymorph we have. Is this the FDA approved? It's a new polymorph. And if it's a new polymorph, what are the properties? And if it's amorphous, can we crystallize it by mechanochemistry, etc., etc.? So there is a dedicated work package on this. Happy to continue the discussion otherwise, but of course we try to cover through the different work packages the different aspects related to the APIs, not only synthesis, as I said, but the formulation aspects at different scale. That's why our consortium is made of scientists with complementary expertise, trying to address the different facets related to the manufacturing.
Yeah, so I see that we've got an email address on the in the chat right now. So if there's any other questions or you to contact us, again, the goal of the European project is not only to engage with the parties involved, but also with people outside the project. So if you've got any questions, go to our webpage, send us an email, send us a direct message on LinkedIn, whatever is easier. We've got another scientific question right now, so maybe that's interesting to address before we cut off. They're asking about the techniques that we're using to monitor and control the API production. I'm assuming both in situ and after the fact, but I think it's not. I cannot read and do this at the same time. So what techniques are we using in the analysis?
We are using what is already known and published in the literature, whether it is the continuous processes or the batch processes. We are, of course, comparing the in situ data with the ex situ data. And this is particularly important for the kinetic studies of each specific reaction. So whether it is in situ or ex situ, we are not selecting one or the other. We are looking broadly the analysis to define the kinetics and the mechanism. So I would not have a preference, I would say, because not everything can be done in situ. Of course, it depends on the device. It depends on the mechanical processing itself. There are some type of systems that you cannot follow in situ. That's why ex situ it's fundamental for this kind of investigation.
Yeah, that was one of the follow-ups to the same question, like saying, maybe do you stop the ball mill, you have a measurement, how do you follow? But again, I think that's probably too technical for the webinar. We can address it, yeah.
I think, yeah, I think there is not a unique technology that should be looked at. Of course, extrusion is as easy, okay, in bracket it's the most immediate approach we can think about, because it's already very much used in several market segments for production of plenty of other different things. So, but mechanochemistry is not just extrusion processes. There are plenty of possibilities.
Yeah, and I think that's also something that's
implementing a process. Yeah.
I think it's something worth highlighting again to maybe close, is that IMPACTIVE is like, because there's several types of European projects, of course, and this is like a very big one with like almost 8 million euros and 17, 18 partners in different countries. So it's a lot of people working during 4 years, and they're working very hard to make this a reality. Not only that, but we have also partnered up with other projects in Europe working in green pharmaceuticals and green chemistry to work together towards better solutions, not only in mechanochemistry, but then, collaborating with other projects, other industries, other universities beyond the consortium. And again, I'm very, very happy to see that we've got such deep questions about the chemistry, about the, technology, about the contamination, which are worries that, not only come from the general audience, but also from experts. So reaching the right audience as well. If anybody's interested in contacting us, you've got the email in the chat, and you've got more information on our webpage, which is mechanochemistry.eu. I'm sure it appears somewhere here, but yeah, please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions. And I just want to finish like thanking you again, Evelina, for a wonderful presentation about the project. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and I hope the people enjoyed. I hope the audience enjoyed, and yeah, we really look forward to seeing you again in the next webinar, where we'll talk about, more of the things happening, not only in Impactive, but then also in these different projects in the same, I think it's called the Green Pharma Cluster, but it's an unofficial name. But yeah, please stay in touch. Subscribe to our newsletter. I'm going to sound like a YouTuber now. Subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and LinkedIn. And yeah, please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions about mechanochemistry. Evelina responds to every single email. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to contact us. And yeah, thank you again for joining, and see you very soon.
Thank you very much.